Imagine having to celebrate saving the world while watching the war criminal who destroyed your kingdom hook up with your best friend. Mermista's better than me, but the craziest part of all of this is the fact that most of the audience is just straight up okay with it. Love is a powerful thing. Some would say it's the only thing, though my bills beg to differ. But in the vast repetitive landscape of storytelling, tales about how love has the power to change people for the better is one of the most recurring themes in all of media. From the galaxies far, far away to good old-fashioned demonic propaganda, but I think one of my favorite examples of this trope is the bond between Entrapta and Hordak from She-Ra. You know, that show neckbeards got really in a tizzy about because they couldn't jerk off to it. He is an evil tyrant with daddy issues leading an army of children. She's a chaotic neutral scientist with a, well, robot kink. On the surface, this is an absolutely insane couple for a kid show to make canon, and for it to be considered somehow less controversial than the main. But once you peel back the layers of what the story is going for, you recognize that this isn't the tale of a beast who was wooed by beauty. That love didn't actually change either of them, it just allowed them to be who they always were.
So are we all just like, okay with this?
Context for those who are watching this and didn't catch my sarcastic summary era. A whole half-decade ago, She-Ra is a story of God's most oblivious child soldier, walking Eternia for 17 years without realizing a faction called the Horde was evil, and that her cat was a lesbian, with it taking war crimes for her to recognize one of these things. Abandoning the only life she's ever known to join the resistance and be the chosen one, Adora starts recruiting her team, and by recruiting, I mean finding more orphans to help defeat the bad guy, as magic is hereditary and everyone's parents are dead. Except for the Dream Daddies. But it's here in the collectathon that was Season 1 that we get introduced to our actual main focus, Entrapta, who manages to truly be not like the other kids by being 30. Entrapta is like around 30, this has been confirmed. A lot of bull has been said about She-Ra's art style and how old clowns can't get off to it, but if I'm personally knocking it for anything, it's that it has the same issues a lot of cartoons have, and that is, it is the just trust me bro effect when it comes to ages. Adora is meant to be around 17, but if the story said she's 13, I would believe it. The Aryan Wet Dream is allegedly old enough to drink by season 5, but not a damn thing changes about her design, which further obscures the fact that while Entrapta may be short, she's actually the oldest one here, and you never fucking guess that based off of pure vibes and the design. This is important as it takes a little bit of the ick out of the, dating the 100-plus-year-old. Like really, this saves Hordak's rep as it takes him from questionable to questing for a short queen. Now with that out of the way, let's actually talk about Entrapta.
A pig! So cute.
Now, my grandma would have described Entrapta as being a little bit funny, which was her way of calling me autistic. The ruler of Drill, Entrapta from the outside looks like she is one crash out away from being a mad scientist. Living in a labyrinthian castle, the organic help can only hand off food to the robotic servants who do the actual work for the princess. Entrapta and other people aren't on speaking terms, they're barely in the same neighborhood, but far from resenting her lack of human attachments, Entrapta instead thrives as she's using all of her free time in the pursuit of science. Hyperfixations may have become a meme, but for Entrapta, it's a lifestyle. But an important distinction to make though is that Entrapta isn't like a lot of similarly obsessed scientists. She may be living that neat lifestyle, but she doesn't actually dislike other people. She's not about to hate someone for just being in the same room, nor resent them for not being on her level of genius. Entrapta, despite how easily she switches teams, doesn't have a mean bone in her body. They can look mean, be mean, or just sadly exist, but Entrapta will see the humanity in anyone, even if they are just a robot. This, according to series creator N.D. Stevenson, is Entrapta's real power. She may not have magic like her fellow kids, but her ability to look past appearances allows her to find good in places you never think to look. Speaking of which,
Things are usually really fun around here, but right now it's all gone a teensy bit deadly.
now She-Ra is a lot like Pixar before Disney decided to be cowards, where the main theme of the story is generational trauma. If a character has a pulse, odds are they are unlearning the toxic beliefs instilled in them by their elders. Adora and Catra are recovering from the worst mother since Beatrice Horseman, AI is trying to groom the hero into being a weapon, and the Horde, when you boil it down, is just one massive cult, with its leader Hordak just repeating the same behaviors that were beaten into him by his own clone brother, father, another thing. Hordak is a fascinating character once you learn exactly what his deal is. As you see, at first, he just looked like your average evil Dark Lord. He was scary, built, and the main architect of a genocidal regime bent on conquering the planet. The heroes were in touch with nature. He lived in an industrial hellscape. If we were checking boxes for being the bad guy, he would have a perfect score, which would set him up to be just the generic kids show villain. But eventually you realize that's the point. Hordak is trying to be this intimidating, ruthless leader. He wants everyone to fear and respect him, but one peek underneath that suit reveals just how vulnerable he really is. Hordak isn't built. He's skinny. He struggles just to function in this planet's atmosphere, rendering all his posturing a facade, and this is what makes him a truly fascinating character to pick at, as he's not meant to be just an evil dictator. He's a guy struggling to perform masculinity. Hordak tries to appear strong, ruthless, refusing to be seen as weak or unworthy, resulting in him keeping everyone he knows at arm's distance, all while he struggles and suffers alone. His attempts to conquer the planet is little more than him trying to prove his value to Horde Prime, whose aura of invincibility and control he seeks to emulate. This is despite the fact that Horde Prime literally sent him to die for the crime of being defective, and I say this in quotes, as we don't really know exactly what that defect ever was. It could be just thinking for himself, or it could be something closer to the genetic chronic illness that resulted in his dilapidated state that we see. Now, I say all this to explain why Hordak did what he did. I'm not excusing any of it, but this lens of viewing his character just adds so much value to him, that everything he does initially is some failed attempt to live up to a toxic standard instilled in him by his creator, with the rest of the world, suffering because of it. This is the most on-the-nose example of toxic masculinity you'll ever see. And if you want extra points to it, his entire leadership strategy seems to be hiding away in his lab to phone home, all while forcing his more talented subordinates, who are all women, to compete against each other as they jockey for his approval, only for him to dismiss them at his leisure. This all feels so intentional and feeds into She-Ra's bigger theme of breaking the trauma cycle and supporting mess. As while he's making everyone else miserable, Hordak, his life fucking sucks. He's isolated himself from everyone else. He has a pet son thing to keep him company, but I don't even want to get into that. And he just has nothing. He's leading a war, but he barely cares about it, as he really cares about nothing but proving his value to someone who truly does not care about him. But then he meets the one person who doesn't give a fuck about all his posturing.
Oh, were you two having a meeting? Sorry. Again, I guess I should be going.
No. You stay.
So, Entrapta was on Team Good Guy, but during a rescue mission, everyone thought she died, with the grown woman deciding the best course of action was to stay put after seeing how much her running off was driving Perfuma crazy. This misunderstanding creates an opportunity for Catra to be her mother, manipulating, lying, and just otherwise attacking her self-esteem, all to get this girl to do what she wants. In this case, it's getting Catra to join Team Horde, which turns out to be shockingly easy. Barely an inconvenience, some would say, as Entrapta is so focused on the science that it detaches her from the actual consequences of her actions. She doesn't really get that the war machines she's making is going to hurt her friends. She doesn't realize that there's massive world-spanning consequences to joining this military dictatorship. But Entrapta, all she really is loyal to her friends, and that the group and ideology does not matter. With Catra, and the best character in the show, Scorpia, filling that void, and so they have Entrapta's loyalty and technical know-how. Even though Catra is a terrible friend, who is using Entrapta despite her sister crush. But officially on Team Trauma, Entrapta's strange dynamic with Hordak begins, and it begins very quickly as he just immediately gives her way more wiggle room than the rest of his cronies. Say what you will about the man and everything else he's done, one of his early virtues that actually made him seem like a more effective leader than he was, is that he often didn't get consumed by headier acts of villainy. When Adore defects and Shadow Mother wants her back, Hordak just says, no, we're not going to be wasting resources reclaiming a lost child, and instead forces her to promote Catra, pointing out, you have 2 kids you allegedly raised, and if this one shits the bed, that's just a sign of your poor parenting. The man had an eye for talent and was willing to break protocol to let these women cook, even if it meant throwing someone else under the bus. Entrapta, thanks to her scientific genius, is able to make the Horde so much more dangerous, upgrading the robots, the weapons, and just the power supply. Hordak was willing to tolerate her quirks so long as it served his goals, which is one of the earliest signs of how Hordak, for all his attempts to mimic Prime in the environment he was raised in, yeah, he was already irrevocably splintered from that culture, with all of his attempts to win back Prime's approval being doomed from the start, as Hordak was and allowed individuality. The Galactic Horde is more of a cult than an empire. It assimilates its victims, stripping them of their individuality till all that's left is Horde Prime, as his narcissism can't fathom being fallible, and as a result, he must be perfect. Therefore, everyone else should become a part of him. Hordak was defective, he was different, and for that he was sentenced to die. But despite being cast aside, he still aspired to win Prime's approval by conquering this planet, not realizing that the mere act of thinking for himself and aspiring to rejoin Prime is in the tyrant's eyes a crime. To be an individual in this culture is to disagree with Prime, and he does not tolerate disagreement. And perhaps because of this previous experience, Hordak is willing to tolerate the quirks and free thinking of his subordinates. They must always work towards his goals, but so long as that greater goal is achieved, he doesn't seem to care what the other members of his crew are doing on their downtime. He was willing to give Catra a second chance if she told the truth, and he was also willing to tolerate Entrapta's odd behavior as it was to his benefit. And I feel there is something here where deep down he knows that if he throws people out for thinking differently, then there's no hope for him. Everything Hordak has done with the Horde is basically a mission statement on how there's a way to be useful to Prime even if they're not perfect or part of him. He wants to rejoin the society that hates him, and this is why he was just always doomed. But you understand why he would believe this over anything else. As yeah, Hordak, he is hating himself into an early grave.
It's outright.
Now, Entrapta at this point in the story has been working for the Horde for a minute. She nearly killed her old friends a couple times, who are shocked and hurt to find out she's willing to work for the enemy. But in the shadow of all that, we have Hordak, failing at life. His portal experiment isn't working, his suit is agony to put on and wear. He refuses to let anyone help him, as that would be admitting to a vulnerability he's ashamed of, which is where Entrapta really comes in clutch. At first it's small and unintentional. Entrapta went looking for a wrench in Hordak's man cave, only to catch sight of his science experiment, and since she's already ignoring how she isn't supposed to be there, she gets to tinkering, making the device work, and after he huffs and puffs, he realized that, oh yeah, I can either keep banging my head against the wall, or I can use Entrapta to complete the mission. Swallowing his pride and fear of being seen as incompetent, the two become lab partners, with Hordak quickly trusting her more than he relied on Catra, who starts tweaking at the idea of being abandoned, as usual. But in less traumatized news, Hordak finally hit rock bottom, as he goes from flexing on how awesome the rest of the galaxy is to taking involuntary floor naps. Entrapta ignores all of his attempts to be scary and just labels him grumpy. But despite that, she doesn't think any less of him for this. All she wants to do is to help, which is a sentiment that slowly melts Hordak's just bitter, cold heart. He reveals his anger and resentment of being a defective clone, his dream of earning his brother dad's approval, with Entrapta, the woman who couldn't pick up a social cue to save her life, sniping Hordak's core conflict with probably her best line.
Perfection is what makes scientific experimentation possible. Imperfection is beautiful, at least to me.
Again, on the surface, these two shouldn't fucking work, and I thought this show was crazy when I realized what they were attempting. But the more you watch it, and the second you get to this line, everything falls into place. Hordak's resentment of himself, his misguided attempts to conquer, I'll be honest, I think it's Etheria, to win the approval of a man who views him as a mistake. All this ingrained toxic behavior is broken by getting to know Entrapta, by being her friend. That she, as just this weird autistic scientist, recognizes the fallacy of perfection, that pursuing some stagnant ideal is far less interesting than working with what you're given and overcoming challenges. Something doesn't need to always be made better, and in fact, it's their quirks that make them who they are, and Entrapta finds them endearing, be they in robots, friends, or a Batman. The things that Hordak has been running from, the parts of himself that he's always thought as shameful, are beautiful to her, and after decades of doubling down, Hordak finally begins to see that there might be another way to live, that he might not have to chase Prime's shadow, but instead be himself. Yeah, he keeps doing evil shit, but for a brief window, he has the chance to imagine a life without Prime. He listens to Entrapta's advice about sparing Catra by sending her on a different suicide mission, but she made him a new exoskeleton, the crystal that powers it literally says loved, and the only thing that could possibly go wrong is someone else managing to crash out worse than the man who built an evil empire because of daddy issues.
I brought you everything you need to open a portal and finish the princesses off for good. What are we waiting for?
So Catra nearly nukes a plan to one of the girls she couldn't even get in a situationship, stabbing Entrapta in the back when the scientist realizes Adora might be telling the truth about the dangers of opening a portal, with Catra lying to Hordak, making him believe that Entrapta betrayed him and sided with the princesses. And at the start of season 4, we get the worst case of two dumb, traumatized bitches telling each other exactly. They both choose to double down on their worst selves and go full throttle on conquering the planet, only for Hordak to eventually learn the truth. A lot of things happen, but long story short, Daddy's home, and everything Hordak did was for nothing. Shocker. Prime peeped into Hordak's brain and saw one original thought and said never again, restoring him to factory settings. And just to prove how fanatical this cult is, Hordak, having been reset, immediately asks for another brain cleaning when Catra calls him by his name, and he feels a little funny about that. This is the level of fanaticism Prime expects, and this very well may have been just what Hordak was like before he arrived on the planet. His memories of being Prime's right-hand man just may have been a delusion, but enough about him reclaiming his identity.
Are you all mad at me?
Entrapta's arc over the course of the series isn't nearly as big as Hordak's. She's not perfect, but when it comes to having an actual arc, it's nowhere near as big as everyone else's. Mainly because she doesn't need to change as much as some other people do. See, Entrapta's biggest issue is that at the start of the story, she is isolated. She is living all on her own. She appears to have always been that way based on the picture of herself with what looks like robot parents. But the more we learned about her, the more it seemed like, yeah, she seemed comfortable at first with how things were, but soon you kind of realize that part of what made her just not attempt to connect with other people was that while she understood tech, getting people never came naturally to her, with it being just as obvious that no one really knew how to deal with Entrapta either. She always did seem like she was in her own little world, not getting the whole us versus them divide everyone else was on, which as we've seen has mixed results. As on one hand, this way of thinking frees Entrapta from the assumptions that might have kept her from just connecting with Hordak. But on the other, Entrapta's antics and not knowing how to deal with her leads to the grown woman getting put on a leash, an incident people have been mad about for years, as yeah, a show infantilizing a grown autistic woman. As someone who is also on the spectrum, I've never been too bothered by how the show handles Entrapta. In fact, I think it's pretty good for the most part, especially when we get into the final season. As Entrapta does rejoin the other princesses, we get a glimpse of that despair she feels from just struggling to connect with others and feeling like she's a burden to them, with us getting a brief period of valid frustration as Entrapta's actions did endanger everyone else. But then, they actually talk and everything gets clarified. The friend group was pissed as she seemingly didn't care about Glimmer being in danger, plus that whole, yeah, she betrayed them thing, with Entrapta realizing this and finally explaining what the fuck she's been trying to do this entire episode, as she is working to undo her mistakes, proving that yeah, she does care, she does know that she messed up, but she also realized that her not explaining and just trying to like, oh, do good things for them, just led to this tension building and made people even madder. But I think what's important here is that Entrapta as a person doesn't really need to change to be expected by others. What she needed to learn was just to be more considerate of her actions and communicate about what she's trying to do. And the onus isn't just on her. The others needed to adjust just how they interacted and talked to Entrapta. That dragging her around wasn't productive and treating her like a problem wasn't going to make anyone's lives any easier. What they needed to do was to understand Entrapta and her quirks. Everyone met in the middle and communicate the proper information. Entrapta is built different, and I don't even mean the neurodivergent sense. It's the fact that she can forgive and look at others without judgment. She was able to forgive Catra despite how she betrayed her and was a bad friend. We see this again with Wrong Hordak, who is another Prime clone that just gets cut off from the hive mind, resulting in an existential crisis that Entrapta helps walk him through in this weird quasi-adoption. Yeah, she could have just left him to die, she could have thrown him away, just ditched him as soon as he was no longer needed, but she kept him around. She realized that he doesn't know what the hell's going on, and she wanted to help. And in a fun little thing, we watch her teach him social cues. Entrapta, she did betray her friends after thinking she was abandoned, but it's in working with her different mindset that yields the best results for everyone involved, saving the planet and helping others heal versus just punishing her for what she did. I think Entrapta is an adorable, amazing character, from her interest in technology to being a solid depiction of neurodivergence. She's a strange little chaotic neutral gremlin, but I love her, especially when it's her connection to Hordak that helps him reclaim himself.
Do I know your face?
Hordak?
Now, Entrapta was on the ship during the big gay rainbow breakout, but she didn't find Hordak. She got the wrong Hordak. But she did lose her love crystal, which naturally Hordak finds, triggering something in him that he couldn't quite shake. This feeling for someone else that wasn't defined by Prime and was just his own. Similar to what happened with Catra, but this time, he doesn't snitch on himself, finding moments to remember his life with Entrapta, the positive memories tied to her. He can't quite recall exactly who she is and what happened, but he remembers. And he remembers her more than he remembers himself. These small rebellions of self-identity eventually allow him to fully defy Prime. As yeah, Prime told him to kill Entrapta. Hordak, after being reduced back to a nameless cog, reclaims his old name, defies his creator, and then he's immediately stripped of it.
And so we shall die in cleansing flame together.
But Prime decides that if he can't win, no one else can, attempting to wipe out all life in the galaxy out of spite, with She-Ra stopping the explosion and coming face to face one last time with Prime, where rather than picking the simple option of killing Hordak to end the threat, Adora instead chooses to purge Prime's influence, freeing Hordak with us getting a flashback to when Hordak first found Adora. As yeah, he did find her when she was a baby, and this moment is actually one of my favorites in the series, as besides being Entrapta, taking Adora was the single most important thing he ever did. This one selfless action is what leads to the rest of the series happening. There was no logical reason, there was nothing to be gained, Adora was just some baby in a field, and he still decided to take her in. It was Shadow Weaver that realized like, oh yeah, this kid has magic, but that one small act of kindness allowed Adora to grow up and to save them all, and it allowed her to save him, which I do find beautiful. These two were created to be pawns used and molded by other things, but this one small act rippled out, and the two were able to stand together, born anew, free from all the forces that wish to control them, their lives finally their own, and able to choose for themselves what comes next, which for Hordak, I love Entrapta. It's a strange but compelling story about two imperfect people who find connection. I think a lot of stories do amazing things with showing how love can change you, but Hordak definitely changes over the course of the story. Entrapta inspires Hordak to break the cycle and the toxic beliefs that have defined him for so long. Hordak was a product of a centuries-long imperialist cult. The violence he inflicted in an attempt to win the approval of a society that would never accept him. But it's meeting Entrapta, hearing for the first time in his life that imperfections aren't flaws, that he kind of realized that he doesn't have to keep doing this, that he can be who he chooses to be, not some mold that was forced upon him. Meanwhile, Entrapta only needs to learn about how her actions have consequences and to communicate with those around her. And that while it may have taken a little bit of trial and error, she eventually found someone who shared her interests, not just tolerate them. It may seem a little iffy that Hordak just gets to hang out with everyone after the big final battle, especially after all he did, but the creator has gone on to say that Hordak will probably be doing community service cleaning up Beast Island for a little while, alongside Entrapta, which I think, yeah, that works. He may not be put on trial, but he will be working to undo some of the damage he caused, which is far more productive and helpful than just punishing him. I was a little iffy when they started making these two a thing, but after seeing all the story did with them, yeah, I can't help but ship it. Also, while I'm here, shout out my second channel, Sarcastic IRL, reacting to just all of the Cartoon Network shows that crashed and burned, and it's an experience. Not all of them are terrible.